On my birthday, my husband and children handed me divorce papers and eviction notices. The house, the business, the company, everything gone. My daughter sneered, calling me pathetic as they all laughed. I smiled, signed without trembling, and quietly left. Within a week, my phone lit up with 42 desperate calls. Karma had arrived faster than expected. She actually thinks we're throwing her a party tomorrow. Sophia's laugh drifted through the heating vent from Elijah's home office directly below our bedroom. I pressed my ear closer to the metal grate. Dad, are you sure the lawyer said the eviction notice is legal? Nathan's voice now. We've covered everything, Elijah responded. The business transfer, the house deed, the divorce papers. By tomorrow night, your mother won't own anything except that ancient Honda she refuses to sell. I remained frozen on our bedroom floor, my knees grinding into the carpet as my family casually discussed my erasure. Before we continue, I want to thank you for being here. If you believe family betrayal deserves consequences, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps others find these important stories. Now let's see what I discovered. My hand found the edge of our bed frame, gripping it until my knuckles went white. Through the vent, I heard chairs scraping against Elijah's office floor. Papers rustling. Nathan's voice carried up again, clinical and detached, the way he probably sounded in court. The transfer documents are ironclad. I've structured it so she can't claim coercion. As long as she signs willingly, thinking it's something else, we're protected. And Patricia's ready to move in this weekend? Sophia asked. There was an eagerness in her voice that made my stomach turn. Patricia Lawson. The name had been floating around our social circle for months. A recent widow who'd inherited her husband's construction supply business. Patricia understands the timeline, Elijah said. His voice held a warmth I hadn't heard directed at me in over a year. She's already moved some of her things into the storage unit downtown. Once Abigail is out, we can start fresh. I crawled backward from the vent, my movements silent on the thick carpet I'd chosen specifically for its sound-dampening qualities. Ironic that my decorating choice now allowed me to eavesdrop on my own demise. Standing on shaking legs, I moved to our bedroom window and looked out at the backyard where we'd raised our children. The swing set had been gone for years, replaced by Elijah's workshop, but I could still see the ghost of it in the worn patch of grass that never quite recovered. The conversation below continued, but I'd heard enough. My family had been planning this for months while I kept their lives running smoothly. This morning alone, I'd already reviewed 5 contracts for the construction company, confirmed next week's material deliveries, and balanced the accounts that Nathan was supposedly managing. I walked to our closet and pulled down the small suitcase from the top shelf, the one I used for overnight business trips. My hands moved automatically, folding clothes, selecting items that predated my marriage. The pearl necklace my mother had given me for my high school graduation. The watch I'd bought myself with my first paycheck. The photo album from college before Elijah existed in my world. Downstairs, I heard the office door open. Footsteps dispersed through the house. Elijah's heavy tread moved toward the kitchen. Nathan's lighter steps headed to the front door, probably leaving for his apartment downtown, the one I'd co-signed for when his credit wasn't sufficient. Sophia's heels clicked toward the garage, where her BMW sat, the car we'd given her for completing her master's degree. I tucked the suitcase back into the closet and descended the stairs with practiced normalcy. Elijah stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into his favorite mug, the one with the hairline crack that Nathan had given him years ago. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something. Guilt? Anticipation? It passed too quickly to identify. Morning plans? I asked, pulling my own mug from the cabinet. Just some paperwork in the office. He didn't meet my eyes. Tomorrow's a big day. Your birthday. The words sat between us like a loaded gun on the table. 60 years old. I added cream to my coffee, watching it swirl and disappear into the darkness. I suppose that's worth celebrating. We have something special planned. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It hadn't in months, I realized. When had I stopped noticing? The morning stretched ahead with its usual routine, but everything felt different now. I drove to our construction company's warehouse, where Carlos greeted me with his usual worried expression about inventory discrepancies. 3 pallets of premium oak flooring had vanished from our system. 2 shipments of marble had been redirected without authorization. The security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned on the exact nights these changes occurred. "Mrs. B," Carlos said, lowering his voice, "something's not right here. These aren't accidents or software glitches." I patted his shoulder, this loyal man who'd worked for us since the beginning. "I know, Carlos. Don't worry about it. Just document everything carefully." He nodded, confusion clear on his face. He didn't understand why I wasn't more upset. How could I explain that stolen flooring was the least of my concerns when my entire life was being systematically dismantled by the people I trusted most? The rest of the day passed in a surreal haze. I attended meetings, signed purchase orders, and solved problems as if everything was normal. But underneath, my mind was racing, planning, preparing. Every interaction with Nathan felt like theater. He stopped by the office to discuss the software issues with inventory, his face a mask of professional concern while knowing he'd orchestrated the entire situation. Sophia called to confirm family dinner on Sunday, her voice bright and false. "We'll celebrate your birthday properly then, Mom. Just family like you prefer." I agreed, matching her tone, both of us performing our roles in this elaborate deception. That evening, I stood in the kitchen preparing dinner while Elijah worked in his office below. Through the vent, I could hear him on the phone, probably with Patricia, his voice low and intimate. Tomorrow they planned to serve me with papers at what I was supposed to believe was my birthday celebration. Tomorrow they would watch me sign away everything I'd spent 32 years building. But tonight I stood in my kitchen cooking Elijah's favorite meal one last time, my movements calm and precise. They thought I was oblivious, content in my routine, blind to their machinations. Let them think that. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it surprises they never anticipated. My phone sat on the counter with 3 numbers already programmed in, waiting for tomorrow's aftermath. Margaret Winters, forensic accountant. James Ashford, corporate attorney. Detective Riley Morrison, who still had questions about my business partner's death 8 years ago. I smiled as I plated the dinner, a genuine smile for the first time all day. They thought tomorrow was their carefully orchestrated finale. They had no idea it was actually just the beginning. Morning arrived with Elijah standing at my bedside, holding a steaming cup of coffee and wearing an expression I hadn't seen since Nathan's high school graduation. His hands trembled slightly as he set the mug on my nightstand, the liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Wear your blue dress today, the one from our anniversary dinner last year." His voice carried an odd formality, as if reading from a script he'd memorized poorly. "We have something special planned for you downstairs." The blue dress hung in our closet, tags still attached. I'd bought it for our anniversary, but we'd never made it to dinner. Elijah had claimed a construction emergency that night, though I'd later seen the receipt from a downtown restaurant in his jacket pocket. "Table for 2. I slipped into the dress now, its silk fabric cool against my skin, and noticed how Elijah watched me from the doorway, his foot tapping against the hardwood floor in a nervous rhythm I recognized from 32 years of marriage. Walking down our stairs felt different this morning. The usual family photos along the wall seemed to watch my descent with knowing eyes. At the bottom, the living room had been rearranged. Our furniture pushed against the walls, creating an open space in the center where our mahogany coffee table sat like an altar. The morning light streaming through the windows illuminated a thick manila folder placed precisely in the center. Nathan stood by the front door, his stance wide and blocking, dressed in his courtroom suit despite it being Saturday. His phone was out, held at an angle that suggested recording. Sophia positioned herself near the hallway to the garage, her own phone raised, a small smile playing at her lips. They formed a triangle with Elijah at the apex, and I stood in the center, surrounded. "Please sit down, Abigail." Elijah gestured to the chair they'd positioned facing the table. Not my usual spot where I'd sat for thousands of morning coffees, but a kitchen chair brought in specifically for this moment. The wood felt cold through the silk dress. Nathan cleared his throat and stepped forward, his lawyer voice replacing any trace of the son who used to call me for advice during law school. "Mom, we need to discuss some changes to the family structure and business arrangements. What we're presenting today is the result of careful consideration and legal consultation." The folder opened under Elijah's fingers, revealing documents marked with yellow tabs indicating signature lines. So many tabs. A lifetime of tabs. Nathan continued speaking, his words flowing with practiced precision while I watched Elijah's hands shake as he spread the papers across the table's surface. The first document is a dissolution of marriage filing. The terms are generous, considering the circumstances. Nathan's eyes never met mine, focused instead on a point just above my head. You'll receive your personal belongings and the Honda. The second set transfers your interest in the construction business to Dad, recognizing his role as primary operator. The third relinquishes claim to this property, acknowledging that the mortgage and improvements were funded primarily through Dad's efforts. Each word landed with calculated impact, but it was Elijah who delivered the personal blow. We've grown apart, Abigail. You know we have. This is best for everyone. A chance for new chapters. His memorized speech faltered as he gestured vaguely at the papers. Patricia Lawson has been helping us navigate this transition. She understands business, understands what we need moving forward. Sophia finally spoke, her young voice carrying a cruelty that must have been rehearsed to achieve such perfect delivery. We've already moved your things to the garage, Mom. The stuff that's actually yours anyway. Most of it was Dad's money that bought everything else. She lowered her phone slightly to look directly at me. It's all sorted, labeled, ready for you to take. The silence that followed felt alive, breathing in the space between us. Through the front window I caught movement. Mrs. Henderson from across the street stood in her garden, pretending to water plants that didn't need watering. Tom Martinez next door had chosen this moment to check his mailbox for the third time this morning. They knew. The whole neighborhood had been informed or warned or invited to witness my humiliation. You're pathetic, Mom. Sophia's words cut through the silence with surgical precision. Did you really think we needed you anymore? Dad built this business. Nathan has the legal expertise. I have my own life, my own career. What exactly do you contribute except going through the motions every day like some kind of robot? Nathan's chuckle came quick and sharp, a sound I'd never heard from him before. Elijah's laugh followed, nervous and high, the laugh of a man who'd crossed a line and couldn't find his way back. The sound echoed off the walls of the home I'd spent 3 decades creating, maintaining, and filling with what I'd thought was love. Movement from the kitchen caught my attention. Marcus Webb stepped into view, Nathan's law school friend who'd attended dozens of dinners at this very table. He held his briefcase like a shield, his expression professionally neutral. I'm here as a witness, he announced unnecessarily, to verify that all signatures are given freely and without coercion. The pen appeared in Elijah's hand, expensive and heavy, the Mont Blanc I'd given him when he'd landed our first major contract. He extended it toward me with the same hand that had held mine through labor pains, through my mother's funeral, through celebrations and failures and ordinary Tuesday mornings that now felt like treasures I'd never properly valued. I took the pen. Its weight felt significant, final. The room held its breath as I pulled the first document toward me. Nathan shifted his position slightly, ensuring his phone captured everything. Sophia zoomed in with hers. Elijah's breathing grew audible in the silence. My signature flowed across the first yellow tab with practiced ease. Then the second. Third. Each name written with the careful penmanship my mother had insisted I perfect. Back when signatures meant promises and promises meant something. I signed away the house where my children had taken their first steps. I signed away the business I'd helped build from a single truck and a dream. I signed away 32 years of marriage with the same steady hand that had once signed our wedding certificate. The final signature complete, I set down the pen with a soft click against the mahogany surface. Looking up, I met each of their eyes in turn. Nathan's held triumph mixed with something else. Uncertainty? Sophia's phone lowered slightly as she processed my calm. Elijah stepped backward as if I might explode, might rage, might become the scene they'd apparently prepared for. That I smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached my eyes and transformed my face into something they hadn't seen in years. Peace. It unnerved them more than any scream could have. Thank you, I said softly, rising from the chair with deliberate grace. This makes everything so much simpler. My steady composure lasted exactly until I closed the Honda's door behind me. The old car's engine turned over on the third try, just as it had for the past 15 years, and I drove away from my former life with nothing but 2 suitcases and a silence so complete it felt like drowning. The extended stay hotel sat 12 miles from the house, far enough that no one from our social circle would accidentally spot my car in the parking lot. The desk clerk barely glanced up as I counted out cash for a week's stay. Room 237 smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, but it had a door that locked and a bed that wasn't shared with a man who'd been planning my disposal for 6 months. I dropped the suitcases by the door and pulled out my phone, switching it to airplane mode before removing the SIM card entirely. They'd expect me to call someone, anyone, to rage and cry and beg for explanations. Instead, I would disappear into the silence they'd created. But first, I needed intelligence. During the drive, I'd mentally photographed every document I'd signed, and now I spread my phone across the bed, zooming in on the images I'd managed to capture while pretending to read. Nathan's legal language was precise but arrogant. He'd buried clauses in subsections, assuming I'd sign without reading, just as I apparently did everything else without thinking. One clause particularly stood out: a non-compete agreement preventing me from working in construction within a 500-mile radius. Unenforceable according to state law, but they didn't know I knew that. My notebook filled quickly with columns of information. Assets they knew about versus ones they didn't. The separate business account I'd opened 3 years ago when I'd started noticing discrepancies, now holding $40,000 in legitimate consulting fees from side projects Elijah had deemed too small to bother with. The storage unit across town where I kept my mother's antiques, still in my maiden name. The network of suppliers who dealt with me directly, bypassing the official company channels. At exactly midnight, I walked to the hotel's business center and used their phone to make the first call. Margaret Winters answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the hour. We'd been roommates at State College, both studying business when women were still oddities in those classrooms. She'd become a forensic accountant specializing in divorce cases, finding hidden assets with the dedication of a bloodhound. Abigail? This number isn't yours. Her voice sharpened with concern. I need your expertise, Margaret. Confidentially. Can we meet tomorrow? Where and when? No questions about why I was calling from an unknown number at midnight, no expressions of surprise. Margaret had handled enough ugly divorces to recognize the sound of a woman in crisis. The second call required more delicate handling. James Ashford had built his law practice on corporate litigation, but 4 years ago, I'd helped his daughter Rebecca escape an abusive marriage by hiding her in our guest house for 3 weeks while James arranged protection orders. He tried to pay me, tried to express gratitude in ways that mattered to men like him, but I'd simply told him that someday I might need a favor. James, it's Abigail Brennan. I'm calling in that favor. His pause lasted 3 seconds. I'll clear my morning schedule. My private office entrance, 7 sharp. The third call made my hands shake slightly. Detective Riley Morrison had investigated my business partner Robert Lawson's death 8 years ago. Heart attack at 52, the coroner had ruled, though Robert had just passed a comprehensive physical the month before. His widow Patricia had inherited his shares in our largest competitor, then sold them 6 months later for triple their value when the company mysteriously received 3 government contracts Robert had been pursuing. Detective Morrison? This is Abigail Brennan. I have information about Robert Lawson that might interest you. That case has been cold for 8 years, Mrs. Brennan. It won't be cold after you hear what I've learned about Patricia Lawson's previous husband, the one who died 5 years before Robert. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Then, can you come to the precinct tomorrow afternoon? Bring everything you have. By dawn, my phone had accumulated 17 missed calls despite being powered off. The hotel's business center computer showed 53 emails in the new account I'd created. Several were from Carlos, my warehouse manager, each one more urgent than the last. I called him from the hotel phone, knowing he'd be at the warehouse by 5:30, just as he had been every morning for 12 years. Mrs. B, thank God. Everything's going crazy here. Mr. B showed up at 4 this morning with that Lawson woman, had me change all the computer passwords, said you were taking a medical leave. His voice dropped. She was measuring the offices, talking about renovations. Carlos, I need you to do exactly what they tell you, but I also need you to document everything. Every change, every visitor, every unusual order or cancellation. Can you do that without being obvious? You gave me a chance when nobody else would, Mrs. B. I don't forget that. The next 2 hours brought a flood of intelligence. 3 major clients had called Carlos directly, confused about emails from Nathan announcing restructuring and price increases. Two suppliers reported that payment terms had been unilaterally changed from 30 days to 90. The Anderson project foreman mentioned that inferior materials had been delivered that morning, despite the specs clearly stating premium grade. But the most valuable information came from an unexpected source. Nancy Palmer, who ran the coffee shop where Elijah met clients, called the hotel's main line asking for me specifically. Someone had told her I might be staying there. "Honey, I don't know what's happening in your world, but that husband of yours has been meeting with Patricia Lawson every Tuesday and Thursday morning for the past 18 months. Always the corner booth, always thought they were being discreet." She paused. "My cousin Linda works at the courthouse. Patricia's been there 3 times in the past month filing paperwork. And here's the interesting part, she filed the exact same types of documents before her second husband died. Linda remembers because it seemed strange at the time, getting everything in order months before he had his sudden heart attack. The pieces formed a pattern so clear I wondered how I'd missed it. Elijah hadn't fallen for a younger woman or gotten bored with our marriage. He'd been selected, groomed, and was now being positioned for something far worse than divorce. Patricia Lawson didn't just steal businesses. She eliminated their owners after securing control. I made one final call that morning, this time to Sarah Martinez, who ran the private investigation firm James had recommended for business matters. Her rate was expensive but worthwhile, especially when I mentioned Patricia Lawson's name. "That woman's got a reputation," Sarah said carefully. "I'll need a retainer, but I can have preliminary background by tomorrow. Fair warning though, if half of what I've heard is true, you're not dealing with a simple divorce situation. You're dealing with someone who plays for keeps permanently." The hotel room had transformed from a refuge into a command center. Documents spread across the bed, laptop open to business accounts they didn't know existed, phone numbers for allies who would help me navigate the disaster my family had unleashed. They thought they'd won, thought I'd crumble into nothing while they celebrated their freedom. They had no idea what they'd actually done. They'd freed me too. Margaret Winters arrived at the hotel room at 7 the next morning carrying 2 laptops and a box of files that made the desk groan when she set them down. Her expression shifted from professional concern to genuine alarm when she saw the documents I'd photographed spread across the bed, each one marked with sticky notes detailing the hidden clauses and implications. 3 years, she said after 90 minutes of analysis, her fingers flying across calculator keys. "They've been bleeding the company for 3 years, Abigail. The patterns are clear once you know what to look for." She pulled up spreadsheets on her laptop, the numbers forming a story of systematic theft. Funds diverted through fake vendor payments, legitimate expenses inflated by 30% with the excess routed to accounts in the Cayman Islands, construction materials purchased but never delivered, their costs written off as losses. The total made my stomach turn. $1.2 million methodically stolen while I'd been focused on daily operations. "Nathan's digital signature appears on every fraudulent document," Margaret continued, highlighting specific transactions. "He used his law firm's credibility to authorize transfers that would never pass a real audit. And here, look at this." She pointed to a series of equipment sales from 6 months ago. "Your daughter sold 3 excavators and a crane through a third party. The equipment went for half its market value, and the buyer was a shell company that traced back to an art gallery. Her gallery. The gallery Sophia had opened last year, the one we'd celebrated with champagne and proud parent photos. Every opening, every exhibition funded by stolen equipment from the company her grandfather had started with his bare hands and a single truck." Margaret's most damning discovery came from cross-referencing dates. "Patricia Lawson's name appears on signature cards for your business accounts 2 weeks before your birthday. Before the divorce papers were filed. They were so confident you'd signed that they'd already started the transfer process." My phone buzzed with a text from Carlos. "Need to talk. In person. Urgent." I met him at a diner 5 miles from the warehouse, choosing a booth where I could watch the door. Carlos arrived looking haggard, sliding into the seat across from me with movements that suggested he'd been looking over his shoulder. "Mrs. B, I stayed late last night pretending to do inventory. Around 9 your husband showed up with that Lawson woman. They didn't know I was in the upper storage area." He pulled out his phone, swiping to a voice recording app. "I recorded this." The audio was muffled but clear enough. Elijah's voice. "Once the divorce is finalized, we can start liquidating assets more aggressively. Then Patricia, her tone cold and businesslike. The timeline is critical. We need her completely removed from any decision-making position. If she tries to interfere, we'll handle it. I've handled obstacles before. There's more, Carlos whispered. I checked the security system this morning. Someone deleted footage from 3 specific nights over the past month. But they didn't know about the backup drive I installed in the ceiling. I have everything. The footage he'd saved on a thumb drive showed Elijah and Patricia photographing inventory lists, client contracts, and supplier agreements. In one frame, Patricia was on her phone while pointing at our client database on the computer screen. The timestamp showed 2:47 a.m., 3 weeks before my birthday. They've been planning to gut the company and sell it piece by piece, Carlos said. I heard her mention buyers from Phoenix who'd take the contracts but not the employees. Everyone would be terminated. Detective Morrison's call came as I was driving back to the hotel. Can you meet me at the precinct now? What I found, we need to discuss it immediately. His office hadn't changed in 8 years, still cluttered with case files and coffee cups that looked like science experiments. But his expression was different, sharper, more focused than when he'd investigated Robert's death. Patricia Lawson's first husband died of a heart attack at 48. Her second, Robert, at 52. Both were cremated within 48 hours, which is unusual but not illegal. But here's what we missed the first time. He spread photos across his desk. Both men increased their life insurance policies 6 months before their deaths. Both named Patricia as beneficiary. And both had the same symptoms in their final weeks: fatigue, shortness of breath, chest pain. Classic signs of digitalis poisoning, which mimics heart attack symptoms. He pulled up another document on his computer. Your husband increased his life insurance policy last month. $2 million. Patricia Lawson is listed as secondary beneficiary after you. But once the divorce is finalized, she becomes primary, I finished. My tech specialist recovered deleted text messages from a phone Patricia thought she'd destroyed. She and your husband discussed permanent solutions and timeline adjustments regarding someone they refer to as the obstacle. Given the context, we believe that's you. The room felt smaller suddenly, the implications crushing. This wasn't just about money or business. Patricia had graduated from financial murder to the actual kind, and Elijah was either complicit or next on her list. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Michael Anderson, whose housing development represented 40% of our company's current contracts. Abigail, I'm calling you directly because something's not right. Nathan missed our meeting yesterday, then sent junior materials to my site that weren't even close to spec. My foreman had to refuse delivery. The substandard lumber could have caused a catastrophic failure. His voice hardened. I also heard you're no longer with the company. Is that true? It's complicated, Michael. Then uncomplicate it. I hired your company because of your reputation for quality. If you're starting something new, I want in. The contract can be transferred if the terms are met. 2 more clients called within the hour with similar concerns. Nathan's incompetence was destroying relationships I'd spent 20 years building. Sophia's material substitutions had caused a minor collapse at a job site, thankfully with no injuries, but the liability issues were mounting. By evening, I had 3 file boxes of evidence: financial fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, corporate sabotage, and enough documentation to destroy the lives of everyone who'd laughed at my humiliation just 48 hours ago. Margaret had traced the offshore accounts. Morrison had built a case that would trigger federal investigation. Carlos had saved footage that would prove premeditation. Sarah Martinez's preliminary report on Patricia included 2 other suspicious deaths in different states. The woman who'd walked out of her house with nothing but memories had transformed into something else entirely. They'd thought they were disposing of a used-up wife and mother. Instead, they'd created their own worst nightmare. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The file boxes sat in my hotel room like loaded weapons waiting to be fired, but I forced myself to wait. Timing would determine whether my evidence destroyed them or merely wounded them enough to retaliate. Each morning brought new reports from Carlos that confirmed what I already knew. Without me, the company was eating itself alive. The Henderson crane broke down again today, Carlos informed me during our Tuesday morning call. Nathan refused to authorize the repair costs, said we'd just use the backup. He doesn't know we sold the backup crane 6 months ago. Sophia handled that transaction herself. The operator had to walk off the Mitchell site. Through the hotel window, I watched rain streak the glass while Carlos detailed the cascade of failures. The automated billing system had crashed because Nathan had forgotten to renew the software license. 3 subcontractors had walked off sites after payments were delayed past 90 days. The liability insurance was set to lapse in a week because Sophia had been using the premium payments to cover her gallery's rent. I documented everything in a leather journal, each failure meticulously recorded with dates, times, and consequences. The methodical note-taking gave me something to focus on besides the hole in my chest where my family used to live. 32 years of marriage reduced to evidence items. 2 children I'd raised became co-conspirators in my elimination. The knock on my door at 3 that afternoon was soft but persistent. Through the peephole, I saw Rebecca Thompson, my mentor from 20 years ago when I'd first entered the construction industry. She stood in the hallway wearing a rain-soaked coat and an expression of determined concern. "Abigail, open the door. I know you're in there and we need to talk." Rebecca entered my room without judgment, taking in the evidence boxes and wall of documents with the practiced eye of someone who'd built an empire from worse circumstances. She'd started Thompson Construction with a single truck after her own divorce, turning it into the largest firm in 3 states. "Word travels fast in our industry," she said, settling into the uncomfortable hotel chair like it was a throne. "Nathan Brennan called me yesterday trying to poach my contracts. The boy actually thought throwing around his father's name would mean something. I told him I only work with professionals who know the difference between rebar and regret. Despite everything, I almost smiled at that. I'm here with an offer, Abigail. Not charity business. I need someone who understands quality control, client relationships, and project management. Someone who can take over our commercial division while I focus on government contracts." She pulled a folder from her briefcase. "Full partnership track. Corner office in the Meridian building. And here's the interesting part. It overlooks your old headquarters. You can watch them fail while you rebuild." The salary she quoted was double what I'd ever drawn from my own company. The benefits included things I'd never allowed myself. Car allowance, expense account, profit sharing that actually meant something. But it was the project list that made my breath catch. Every client who'd called me about Nathan's incompetence was already inquiring about moving their contracts to Thompson Construction. "When would you need an answer?" "Take your time. A week, maybe 2. Though I should mention the Anderson project is specifically requesting your involvement. Apparently, there was an incident with substandard materials that nearly caused a structural collapse. After Rebecca left, I needed groceries and basic supplies. The hotel's mini-mart prices were astronomical, and I'd been living on vending machine coffee for too long. The supermarket on Riverside Drive was far enough from our usual haunts that I felt safe from unexpected encounters. I was comparing pasta prices when a hand grabbed my upper arm. Elijah stood there, his face haggard, his usually perfect hair unkempt. The confident man who'd orchestrated my removal looked desperate, smaller somehow. "Abigail, we need to talk. You don't understand what's happening. Patricia, she's not what I thought." Movement outside caught my eye. Patricia Lawson sat in her Mercedes, engine running, watching us through the store's glass front. The man in her passenger seat was unfamiliar, thick-necked and alert, his eyes tracking our interaction with professional interest. "Let go of my arm, Elijah." My voice carried enough volume that nearby shoppers turned to look. "Please, just 5 minutes. You're in danger. We're both in danger. She's done this before." I pulled free and walked quickly toward the coffee shop next door, pulling out my phone as I moved. The coffee shop was crowded, full of witnesses, and had a rear exit through the kitchen if needed. Detective Morrison answered immediately. "Patricia Lawson is at Riverside Market with an unknown male, possibly armed. Elijah just approached me, seems panicked. Stay in public spaces. I'm sending a unit now." Through the coffee shop window, I watched Elijah exit the store and approach Patricia's car. She rolled down the window, and even from distance, I could see her expression shift from charming to vicious. Elijah stepped back, his hands raised defensively. The unknown man got out of the car, moving toward Elijah with deliberate intimidation. Then police sirens wailed in the distance, and both Patricia and her companion quickly returned to the Mercedes and drove away. Morrison called back an hour later. "We missed them, but we ran the plates on her car. She was at the university library this morning, accessing medical journals. Specifically, articles about plant-based toxins that mimic cardiac symptoms. She's escalating. That night, I sat surrounded by 12 manila envelopes, each one labeled with a different destination. The IRS would receive documentation of tax fraud. The state attorney general would get evidence of embezzlement. The construction board would learn about safety violations and substandard materials. Patricia Lawson's insurance companies would discover interesting patterns in her beneficiary history. But the masterpiece was the package for Channel 7's investigative reporter, Dana Chin, who'd been looking for a story about corporate corruption. I included enough evidence to launch an investigation but held back the most damaging revelations. Those would come later, timed perfectly with Elijah's attempt to file mental incompetency claims against me. Each package contained different pieces of the puzzle, ensuring multiple investigations would launch simultaneously. No single agency would have the complete picture, but together they would create an inescapable net. Digital copies were uploaded to cloud storage accounts under different names. Physical copies were secured in a safety deposit box at a bank where nobody knew me. The 12th envelope was different. It contained a single photograph, Patricia and Elijah at the warehouse at 2:47 a.m., and a note, "I know everything. Your move." That envelope would be hand-delivered to Patricia Lawson tomorrow afternoon, right after the others were mailed. Let her wonder how much I knew. Let her panic about which agencies were already investigating. Let her make the kind of mistakes that desperate people always make when they realize their perfect plans are crumbling. The rain had stopped, leaving the parking lot gleaming under streetlights. Somewhere across town, my family was probably sleeping peacefully in beds I'd chosen, in rooms I'd decorated, confident in their victory. Dawn on day 12 arrived with me standing at a postal service counter, watching the clerk process 11 certified mail packages. Each envelope disappeared into the system with a tracking number that I carefully recorded. The 12th package, Patricia's personal warning, would be delivered by courier at exactly 2 p.m., giving the official investigations a 6-hour head start. By the time I arrived at Rebecca Thompson's office for my first unofficial day of work, the machinery of justice had already begun grinding forward. Rebecca had given me temporary workspace on the executive floor, a glass-walled office that overlooked the city's construction district. From my window I could see the building that housed Brennan Construction, the company I had helped build from nothing. At 9:47 a.m., 3 unmarked government vehicles pulled into the parking lot of my former headquarters. Federal agents emerged with boxes and warrant folders, their movements efficient and practiced. Through Rebecca's high-powered telescope, which she kept for market research, I watched employees gathering at windows, their confusion visible even from this distance. My phone, silent for nearly 2 weeks, began its symphony at 10:15 a.m. The first call came from Elijah. I let it go to voicemail, then listened. "Abigail, something's happening. The IRS just froze all our accounts. They're saying something about fraudulent tax filings. This has to be a mistake. Call me immediately." 5 minutes later, another voicemail. "The state attorney general's office is here with a warrant. They're seizing computers. Abigail, whatever you think happened, this isn't the way. Please." Nathan's first message arrived at 10:32 a.m. "Mother, I don't know what you've done, but you're destroying everything grandfather built. We can resolve this privately. As your attorney, as your son, I'm advising you to contact me immediately." By noon the voicemails had evolved. Elijah's voice had progressed from confusion to anger to something approaching panic. "They found the offshore accounts." "How did you know about the offshore accounts?" "Patricia says you must have been spying on us illegally. We'll fight this, Abigail. You won't win." Nathan's legal threats had dissolved into desperate negotiations. "The construction board is threatening to revoke our license. 3 projects just canceled their contracts. Mom, please, let's talk about this rationally. We can work something out." But it was Sophia's message that carried the most striking transformation. Her voice, usually so confident and dismissive, cracked with genuine fear. "Mom, my gallery's been seized. They say it was bought with embezzled funds. I don't understand what's happening. I don't have anywhere to go. The apartment was in the company's name. My cards don't work. Mom, I don't know how to. I've never had to. Please call me." 42 calls in total by 3 p.m. I documented each one, saving the voicemails to multiple devices. Evidence of their panic would be useful if they tried to claim ignorance later. The courier confirmed Patricia's package delivery at 2:03 p.m. By 2:47 p.m., Sarah Martinez's investigator sent me photos that exceeded my wildest expectations. Patricia stood on her penthouse balcony, hurling what appeared to be Elijah's clothes into the afternoon air. Expensive suits floated down like surrender flags while she screamed loud enough for neighboring buildings to hear. She found the photos in the package, Sarah explained over the phone. Pictures of Elijah with 2 different women at hotel bars over the past year. He's been playing her while she was playing him. She's destroying everything he left at her place. The investigator's video footage showed Elijah arriving at the building, looking up at the clothing rain, then backing away as Patricia appeared to throw a laptop that exploded on the sidewalk near his feet. The security guard blocked his entry while Patricia could be heard shrieking about being made a fool. "There's more," Sarah continued. She came down to the lobby with scissors, threatening to cut up his car seats. Building security had to restrain her. Elijah fled to a motel off Highway 9. The same one where you're staying, actually. He's 3 doors down from your room. The irony was almost poetic. The man who had orchestrated my exile was now living in the same cheap motel, probably eating from the same vending machines, definitely experiencing the same crushing realization that everything he thought he controlled had slipped away. Rebecca and I spent the afternoon visiting clients who had expressed concerns about Brennan Construction's stability. The Anderson meeting was particularly satisfying. Michael Anderson himself greeted us in his office, where architectural plans for his development covered every surface. "Abigail, I'm glad you're here. I received a call from Nathan Brennan this morning, threatening legal action if I break our contract." 20 minutes later, the news broke about federal investigations into the company. "I want Thompson Construction to take over immediately, with you personally overseeing the project." We visited 6 clients that day. Every one of them signed transfer agreements moving their contracts to Thompson Construction. The combined value exceeded $8 million, more than Brennan Construction's entire annual revenue from the previous year. Carlos called as we returned to the office. "Mrs. B, it's chaos here. 17 workers have already quit. The rest are updating resumes. Nathan tried to run a safety meeting but didn't know the basic protocols. Someone called OSHA about the violations. They're coming Monday. Carlos, Thompson Construction needs an experienced warehouse manager. Same crew, better pay, actual safety standards. Interested?" His relief was audible. "When do I start?" By evening, Rebecca and I had hired 12 of Brennan Construction's best employees, secured 4 major contracts, and established a transition timeline that would have the Anderson project back on schedule within a week. We celebrated with coffee in her office, watching the last government vehicle leave the Brennan Construction parking lot. "You know what the beautiful part is?" Rebecca said, studying the building through her telescope. "You didn't destroy them. You just removed yourself from the equation and let them reveal who they really were. The fraud, the theft, the incompetence, it was always there. You were just the foundation holding it all together." My phone buzzed with text number 43 from Elijah. "Patricia knows about the other women. She's threatening to go to the police about something. I don't know what you've started, but it's destroying everything." I deleted the message without responding. Tomorrow the news would break publicly. Dana Chen's investigative report would air during the evening news. The construction community would learn about the fraud, the safety violations, and the federal investigations. By week's end, Brennan Construction would exist only as a cautionary tale about greed and betrayal. But tonight I sat in my temporary office, looking out at the city I had helped build one quality structure at a time. Tomorrow I would sign my employment contract with Thompson Construction. Tomorrow I would begin rebuilding my professional life on my own terms. The phone rang once more, call number 44. This time I recognized the number as the motel's front desk. Elijah was probably trying to reach me through their phone since I wouldn't answer his calls. I let it ring, packed my things, and headed to my room at a different hotel across town. The new hotel room felt safer, 20 miles from Elijah and his desperate attempts to reach me through the motel's front desk. I had just finished organizing my new office supplies when Dana Chen's investigative report began playing on the mounted television. Her serious expression filled the screen as she stood outside Brennan Construction's headquarters, the building looking abandoned despite the middle of the business day. Tonight, we investigate the sudden collapse of one of the region's most trusted construction companies, following federal raids and multiple arrests, Dana announced. Behind her, workers were removing the bronze letters spelling Brennan from the building's facade, each letter dropping into a truck bed with a hollow clang. My phone vibrated with a text from Detective Morrison. Turn to Channel 5 instead. You'll want to see this live. I switched channels to find breaking news coverage. Federal agents were escorting Elijah from the Highway 9 motel in handcuffs, his head down, his expensive suit replaced by the rumpled clothes he'd been wearing for days. The timestamp showed 6:47 p.m., exactly 3 weeks since my birthday ambush. The reporter's voice carried over the footage. Elijah Brennan, founder of Brennan Construction, arrested on charges of tax evasion, fraud, and conspiracy. The scene shifted to Nathan's law firm downtown. Through the glass doors, agents could be seen carrying boxes while Nathan stood frozen at the reception desk, his colleagues backing away as if his legal troubles might be contagious. His arrest happened in full view of the senior partners who had once praised his ruthless efficiency. They led him out through the main entrance, ensuring everyone saw the Golden Boy's public downfall. Sophia's arrest was quieter but no less complete. The gallery she had loved so much was wrapped in yellow tape, the windows she had spent weeks arranging now blocked by federal seizure notices. Agents found her sitting in the back office, surrounded by pieces she could no longer sell from a business that no longer existed. The reporter noted she went quietly, seemingly in shock. Patricia Lawson's arrest provided the evening's dramatic climax. News helicopters circled her penthouse as agents attempted entry. She could be heard screaming about her rights, about conspiracy, about being set up. The footage showed her being dragged out, still in designer heels and a silk robe, her perfectly styled hair finally disheveled. The reporter mentioned additional charges being prepared related to 2 previous husbands' deaths. Morrison called as the coverage continued. Can you come to the station tomorrow morning? There are some things you need to know about what we found. The next morning, Morrison's office felt different. The exhaustion in his eyes had been replaced by grim satisfaction. He spread files across his desk, each one labeled with names I recognized. The text messages we recovered are damning. Patricia and Elijah discussed your removal extensively. The birthday ambush was supposed to destabilize you, make you vulnerable. Patricia had sourced digitalis from a contact in Mexico. The plan was to wait 3 months, then invite you for a reconciliation dinner. My stomach turned, but Morrison continued. Here's the ironic part. Patricia was simultaneously planning Elijah's death for approximately 8 months later. She'd already drafted documents transferring his assets to her name. Your husband thought he was the predator, but he was always her prey. He showed me a message from Patricia to an unknown number. E is easier to manage than expected. Once A is handled, we'll need 6 to 8 months before his heart attack. The construction contracts alone worth 8M. Your walking away disrupted everything, Morrison explained. Without you to blame for the company's collapse, Patricia couldn't position herself as Elijah's savior. When the investigation started, she panicked, moved too fast, made mistakes. Your silence saved your life and probably his too. I returned to Thompson Construction's offices to find my permanent workspace ready. The corner office Rebecca had promised overlooked the entire construction district. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched a foreclosure notice being posted on the house I had designed with such hope decades ago. The workers were gentle with it, as if understanding the weight of what they were posting. Throughout the day, former Brennan Construction employees stopped by to thank me for hiring them at Thompson. Carlos had brought his entire warehouse team. The Anderson project foreman had convinced his best crews to make the switch. Even the receptionist, Maria, who'd worked at Brennan for 15 years, now sat at Thompson's front desk. You gave us dignity in this transition, Maria said, tears in her eyes. You could have left us all to sink with them, but you didn't. The mail arrived at 3 p.m. with 3 letters forwarded from the hotel. Nathan's handwriting on the first envelope was shaky, the confident legal script replaced by desperate scrawls. His note was brief. Mom, I need money for the commissary. They're threatening to take my bar license. I know I have no right to ask, but I don't know who else to turn to. The other inmates found out I'm a lawyer. It's not safe here. Sophia's letter ran 3 pages, her artistic handwriting cramped and tear-stained. I never learned anything real, Mom. You tried to teach me, but I thought I was above it all. I thought the money would always be there. I can't even make coffee properly. The halfway house has me washing dishes and I don't even know how to do that right. I'm 26 and I'm starting from zero. Elijah's message came through his public defender, typed on official letterhead. Mrs. Brennan, my client maintains that Patricia Lawson manipulated the entire situation. He states he was coerced into the divorce proceedings and was unaware of the criminal elements involved. He wishes to discuss the possibility of character testimony regarding his years as a law-abiding citizen. I created a new folder in my filing cabinet, labeling it Birthday Gifts in permanent marker. Each letter went inside not out of cruelty but as evidence of consequences. They had given me divorce papers for my 60th birthday. The universe had returned the favor with arrest warrants for theirs. That evening I stood in my new office as the sun set over the city. The Brennan construction sign was completely gone now, leaving only ghost letters on the building's facade where decades of weather had left their mark. Tomorrow, demolition would begin on the interior, stripping it bare for new tenants. Rebecca joined me at the window, handing me a cup of tea. Any regrets? I thought about the question, watching the last light fade from my former life. They taught me something valuable. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's stepping back and letting them destroy themselves while you build something better from their ashes. The local news played on the office television, showing footage of the 4 arrests again. The reporter mentioned that additional charges were being filed daily as more evidence surfaced. The Construction Industry Board had permanently revoked Brennan Construction's license. The IRS had seized all assets pending investigation. Patricia Lawson was being investigated for 2 additional suspicious deaths in other states. Justice had arrived exactly 3 weeks after my birthday, wearing handcuffs and carrying federal warrants. 6 months had transformed everything except the sunrise. I stood at the window of my new apartment, watching the same sun paint the same sky, but everything it illuminated had changed. The coffee in my hand came from a machine I had chosen, brewed exactly how I preferred it without considering anyone else's taste. The mug, a handmade ceramic piece from a local artist, had no history, no memory, no ghost of better times haunting its rim. The apartment itself was smaller than the house, but every square foot belonged entirely to me. The furniture told no stories of compromise. The leather reading chair by the window had caught my eye at an estate sale, and I bought it without asking permission or checking joint accounts. The dining table seated 4 instead of 8, made from reclaimed pine by a craftsman who understood that imperfections could be beautiful. Above it hung photographs from the past 6 months. Carlos and his family at a barbecue, Rebecca and me signing contracts. The Anderson Project's completion ceremony where Michael Anderson had publicly credited me with saving his development. My phone rang with Margaret Winters calling to confirm lunch plans. She had become a regular presence in my new life, our college friendship rekindled by crisis and strengthened by survival. We met weekly now, 2 women who had learned that starting over at 60 was not a consolation prize but an unexpected gift. The partnership ceremony at Thompson Construction was scheduled for that afternoon. Rebecca had insisted on making it formal, inviting clients and industry leaders to witness the transition from employee to equal partner. The documents were already signed. I had learned to read every word now. But Rebecca understood the value of public recognition. The conference room filled with people who had watched my public humiliation and private rebuilding. Michael Anderson arrived early, bringing his wife who pulled me aside to whisper her admiration. 3 other major clients attended, each one having transferred their contracts from Brennan to Thompson specifically because of my involvement. The construction inspector who had flagged Nathan's safety violations shook my hand with genuine respect. Rebecca stood at the podium, her voice carrying across the room with practiced authority. 6 months ago this company gained something invaluable: integrity in human form. Abigail Brennan rebuilt herself and our commercial division simultaneously, securing $8 million in new contracts while maintaining a perfect safety record. Today she becomes my equal partner in Thompson Construction, though she has always been my equal in every way that matters. The applause felt different from any recognition I had received before. This was earned entirely by my own efforts, not reflected glory from a husband's success or children's achievements. The champagne tasted sweeter because I had paid for it myself. That evening a letter arrived at my office. Federal Bureau of Prisons official seal, Elijah's prisoner number in the corner. Inside, a visitation request form with a handwritten note. Please. One conversation before my transfer. There are things you need to know about the children. I held the paper for a long moment, feeling its weight. The man who had orchestrated my disposal was invoking our children to manipulate me one last time. But curiosity won. 3 days later, I sat in a federal detention center's visiting room, watching them bring in someone who looked like Elijah, aged 10 years. His orange jumpsuit hung loose on a frame that had lost 30 pounds. The confident posture had been replaced by a defensive hunch. When he sat across from me, separated by reinforced glass, his hands shook as he picked up the phone. "You look well," he said, his voice hollow through the receiver. I said nothing, waiting. "They're struggling. Nathan and Sophia. The public defender says Nathan might get 18 months minimum security if he cooperates fully. Sophia's in a halfway house learning job skills." He paused, studying my face for sympathy that wasn't there. "There are children, Abigail. They stopped being my children when they laughed at my pain." His face crumpled slightly. "I need money for the commissary. And a lawyer, a real one. Patricia's team is trying to pin everything on me, making me the mastermind when she was pulling the strings all along. You made your choices, Elijah. Every signature, every lie, every secret meeting with Patricia. Those were all choices. I loved you once," he said desperately. "Doesn't 32 years count for anything?" It counted for everything. That's why the betrayal was so complete. I stood to leave. "Abigail, please." His voice cracked through the phone. "I'm being transferred to federal prison in Arizona. 5 years minimum. I'll die in there." I hung up the phone and walked away, his muffled shouts following me through the reinforced glass. The desperation in his voice was the same tone I had carried in my chest that morning they ambushed me. Now it was his burden to bear. A week later, another unexpected letter arrived. This one from Jennifer, Nathan's ex-wife, whom he had divorced 2 years ago, claiming she lacked ambition. She was struggling, she wrote, trying to restart her life after Nathan had hidden assets during their divorce. She had heard about my new position and wondered if Thompson Construction had any entry-level positions. I hired her as an administrative assistant. She arrived that first morning nervous but determined, grateful for the chance Nathan had never given her. Watching her slowly find her confidence over the following weeks felt like balance being restored to the universe. The news eventually stopped covering the Brennan construction scandal. Elijah got 7 years. Patricia got life without parole after they connected her to 4 murders across 3 states. Nathan received 2 years and permanent disbarment. Sophia got probation and community service, though the halfway house reported she was finally learning basic life skills. I kept their letters in the folder marked birthday gifts, occasionally reading them to remind myself how far I had traveled from that morning of orchestrated cruelty. They had given me divorce papers and eviction notices, thinking they were ending my story. Instead, they had freed me to write a better one. Standing in my office as another day ended, I watched the city lights begin their nightly show. Somewhere in federal prisons across the country, the people who had tried to erase me were learning what erasure really felt like. Those 42 desperate calls had come too late because karma had already been set in motion the moment they chose cruelty over compassion. My phone sat silent on my desk, no longer a source of dread but a tool for the business I was building on my own terms. Tomorrow would bring new contracts, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that the best revenge was not destruction but reconstruction. I had built beauty from their ashes, and it was entirely mine. If this story of calculated revenge had you holding your breath, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Abigail calmly signed every document with a serene smile, knowing she had already set her plan in motion. What was your most satisfying moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. You've got 5 minutes. My father-in-law, the boss, snapped before the $5 million pitch. He wanted to see me crumble. I had no notes, no deck, just my phone and a deep breath. 30 minutes later, the room fell silent. Then the client smiled and said something I'll never forget. 5 minutes, Sophia. Colton's voice sliced through the morning air as I reached for my coffee mug. My father-in-law stood in my office doorway, gray eyes glinting with something that made my spine straighten. The Morrison team just arrived. They're waiting in conference room 1. My hand froze midway to the mug. The Morrison presentation was tomorrow. My laptop was locked in IT. 8 weeks of preparation and he was giving me 5 minutes. That's impossible, I started. For minutes now, he said, checking his Rolex. Better hurry. If you've ever been underestimated at work or faced sabotage from those in power, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us share stories of women who refuse to be silenced. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor. Brown liquid splashed across my shoes, the expensive heels Gregory had bought me for our anniversary. Colton didn't even glance down at the mess. He just stood there blocking my doorway, savoring this moment he'd clearly orchestrated. My materials are at the printer, I said, my voice steadier than my hands. The presentation deck is on my laptop in IT. You know this. Then you'd better get creative. He stepped aside with mock courtesy. 3 minutes, Sophia. Don't keep Victoria Morrison waiting. Victoria Morrison. The CEO who'd flown in from Boston specifically for tomorrow's meeting. The woman who controlled a $5 million contract that could transform Whitmore Analytics' pharmaceutical division. She was sitting in conference room 1 right now, expecting a presentation I couldn't give. I grabbed my phone from the desk, the only thing I had. My fingers shook as I pulled up my notes app, trying to access the cloud backup. Access denied. Company security protocols. Of course. This is sabotage, I said, meeting Colton's eyes directly. This is business. His smile was razor thin. Real executives adapt. Though I suppose that's hard to understand when you marry into success rather than earn it. 3 years. 3 years of these subtle cuts, these careful undermining comments. 3 years of pretending I didn't notice how he credited my wins to Gregory's influence while ensuring my failures were mine alone. But this wasn't subtle anymore. This was war. I pushed past him, my broken heel clicking unevenly on the marble floor. The executive hallway stretched before me like a gauntlet. Through the glass walls I could see my colleagues at their desks, some glancing up with curiosity, others with something that looked like pity. They knew. Everyone knew what was happening. 2 minutes, Colton called after me, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. The bathroom was closer than the conference room. I ducked inside, my hands gripping the sink as I stared at my reflection. My face was pale but composed. The dark circles Emma had noticed at lunch yesterday were hidden under concealer. My hair was perfect. I'd styled it this morning thinking about tomorrow's presentation, not knowing Colton had already moved the pieces on his chessboard. 8 weeks of work. 8 weeks of studying Morrison Pharmaceuticals' market patterns, their drug pipeline, their competition. I'd built a predictive analytics model that could revolutionize how they tracked physician prescribing patterns. It was all in my head, but how could I present it with nothing but my phone? 1 minute, Colton's voice echoed from the hallway. I straightened my jacket, wiped the coffee splatter from my shoes with a paper towel and walked out. The conference room loomed ahead, its glass walls revealing the scene inside. 8 executives arranged around the polished table. Victoria Morrison at the head, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, fingers drumming against her portfolio. Colton stood by the door like a sentinel. Your presentation, Mrs. Whitmore? He emphasized the last name, reminding everyone I was here by marriage, not merit. Right here, I said, holding up my phone. His eyebrows rose in manufactured surprise. That's rather unconventional. So is moving a meeting up 24 hours without notice. I opened the door before he could respond. The room fell silent as I entered. 8 pairs of eyes tracked my movement. Victoria Morrison's expression was glacial. Ms. Morrison, I began, then caught myself. Mrs. Morrison. Thank you for making time today. We were told the presentation was ready. Her voice could have frozen water. We've flown in specifically for this. It is ready. I set my phone on the table, screen up, fighting to keep my hands steady. But before I begin, I'd like to understand something. What's the one insight about your prescriber data that would fundamentally change your market approach? Silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. We've covered our requirements extensively, the CFO said, shifting in his Italian leather chair. In the preliminary meetings. Requirements and revelations are different things. I pulled up my phone's calculator app, the only tool I had. You're launching Oncoprex next quarter. Every analytics firm you've met has shown you beautiful dashboards, tracking prescription rates, regional adoption, physician demographics, standard metrics, safe predictions. Victoria leaned forward slightly. Just an inch, but I caught it. But that's not what keeps you awake at night, is it? I started sketching numbers on my phone screen, holding it up so they could see my rough calculations. The FDA approved Oncoprex for second-line treatment. But your real market, your $5 million question, is first-line prescription. You need to know which doctors will take that leap and why. The room's energy shifted. The CFO stopped fidgeting with his pen. Traditional analytics track what physicians prescribe. I continued, my confidence building as I fell into the rhythm of the data I'd lived with for 8 weeks. But you need to predict what they're thinking before they prescribe. The hesitation patterns. The patient profiles that trigger conservative versus aggressive treatment choices. I turned my phone sideways, using the Note app to sketch a rough diagram. There's a 3-second pause in electronic prescribing systems when doctors consider off-label use. 3 seconds that your current analytics can't capture, but that predicts market adoption 6 months out. How could you possibly know that? Victoria asked, but her tone had changed. Less ice, more interest. Because I spent 6 weeks analyzing prescription timing data from public health databases. Not the prescriptions themselves, the metadata around them. The hesitations. The revised entries. The cancelled and resubmitted orders. It's all there if you know how to look. I was in my element now, despite having nothing but my phone and my memory. This was my 8 weeks of work distilled to its essence. No fancy slides, no polished graphics. Just the raw insights that mattered. Your competitors are tracking what happened, I said, meeting Victoria's eyes directly. I can show you what's about to happen. Through the glass wall, I saw Colton's expression. The smug satisfaction had drained from his face. This wasn't going according to his plan. He'd expected me to crumble, to apologize, to fail spectacularly. Instead, I was doing something else entirely. Continue, Victoria said, and for the first time she smiled. For 25 minutes, I walked them through algorithms I'd developed, market patterns I'd discovered, physician behavior models that existed only in my memory. My phone battery dropped to 12%. Sweat gathered between my shoulder blades, but I kept my voice steady, professional, even as I felt Colton's presence burning through the glass wall behind me. The 3-second hesitation pattern, Victoria said, tapping her manicured nail against the table. Show me the math behind it. I turned my phone sideways, using my calculator app to work through the statistical correlation. My fingers flew across the tiny screen, each tap a small act of defiance against the man who'd orchestrated this ambush. Public health databases show prescription entries averaging 11 seconds for standard medications, I explained, holding up the screen. But for off-label use of oncology drugs, that average jumps to 14.3 seconds. That 3-second gap? It represents physician uncertainty. Track it across thousands of prescriptions, and you can predict which doctors will become early adopters. The CFO leaned forward. Our current analytics firm hasn't mentioned anything about timing patterns. Because they're looking at outcomes, not process. I switched to my Notes app, sketching a rough timeline. They're telling you what happened last quarter. I'm showing you what will happen next quarter. Through the glass, I caught Beth watching from her desk, Colton's secretary who'd witnessed 3 years of his calculated cruelty. She gave me the slightest nod, invisible to everyone else, but I saw it. Even she knew what this was. A public execution that was somehow becoming something else. Mrs. Whitmore, Victoria said, and I noticed she dropped the uncertainty from her voice. You said you have a working prototype? My stomach tightened. The prototype dashboard was sitting in pieces on my desk, waiting for tomorrow's assembly. The prototype exists. It's just not physically here. Because the meeting was scheduled for tomorrow, she said. It wasn't a question. The room went silent. Victoria's eyes shifted from me to Colton, who'd somehow materialized in the doorway. He entered with that practice smile, the one he used for damage control. Technical difficulties are unfortunate, he said smoothly. Perhaps we should reschedule when Sophia is better prepared. I disagree. Victoria's voice cut through his attempted save. I've sat through 47 vendor presentations in my career. 47 PowerPoints full of promises and projections. This is the first time someone has shown me the thinking behind the solution. She stood and the room seemed to hold its breath. My phone chose that moment to flash its 10% battery warning. However, Victoria continued, walking around the table toward me, I need to know this isn't just theoretical. Can you demonstrate even a basic proof of concept? My mind raced. The prototype was in pieces. My laptop was locked away. But I had something else. The beta testing account I'd created on my personal tablet sitting in my desk drawer 20 feet away. Give me 90 seconds, I said. Colton's voice was sharp. Sophia, I don't think. 90 seconds, Victoria interrupted him, checking her Cartier watch. Starting now. I walked out of the conference room with as much composure as I could manage, my broken heel clicking unevenly on the marble. Don't run, I told myself. Running would look desperate. But my pace was just short of a sprint. My office door was locked. Of course it was. My keycard was in my laptop bag in IT. Looking for this? Beth appeared beside me holding her master keycard. She swiped it without a word and I squeezed her hand in silent gratitude. 30 seconds gone. I yanked open my drawer, grabbed the tablet and powered it on. The loading screen felt eternal. Come on, come on. 50 seconds, Colton announced from the hallway loud enough for everyone to hear. He wanted the whole floor to witness this. The tablet finally loaded. I pulled up the beta dashboard, my fingers flying through the login screen. The interface was rough, unpolished, but it worked. It showed real data, real patterns, real predictions. Time's up, Colton called. I walked back into the conference room with 5 seconds to spare, tablet in hand. Your proof of concept, I said, connecting it to the room's display screen. The dashboard filled the wall, rough around the edges but functional. Real-time prescription data flowed across the screen, heat maps showing hesitation patterns, predictive models calculating adoption rates. This is live data? Victoria asked, standing to get a closer look. From the last 30 days. Public databases only, of course. But watch this. I selected a specific region, zooming into prescription patterns for their competitor's drug. See this cluster of prolonged decision times? These physicians are prime targets for Oncaprex education. They're hesitating on your competitor's drug, which means they're looking for alternatives. The room erupted in quiet discussion. Victoria's team huddled, pointing at different aspects of the dashboard, their excitement palpable. This wasn't what they'd expected from a corporate analytics presentation. How long have you been developing this? Victoria asked. 8 weeks of focused development. 2 years of conceptual work. Alone. I felt Colton's presence behind me, his breathing slightly elevated. The concept and execution are mine. The Whitmore Analytics team would handle implementation and scaling. Victoria nodded slowly, then turned to face Colton directly. Mr. Whitmore, you have an exceptional analyst here. She's family, Colton said, the words sounding like they were choking him. We nurture talent at Whitmore Analytics. Interesting. Victoria's smile was sharp. Because this felt very much like a trial by fire. Moving a meeting up 24 hours, presenting without materials. Some might call that setting someone up to fail. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I'm sure there was a miscommunication, Colton said, but his voice had lost its smooth edge. I'm sure. Victoria turned back to me. Mrs. Whitmore, or do you prefer Ms.? Either is fine. I have one condition for moving forward with this contract. She pulled out her business card, the thick cardstock catching the light. You lead this project. Not a team, not a committee. Personally. My heart hammered against my ribs. I would be honored. No one else touches this without your approval. Not your husband, not anyone. Her eyes flicked to Colton. Is that acceptable to Whitmore Analytics? Colton's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. Around us, his employees watched through the glass walls. This was his company, his domain, and Victoria Morrison had just crowned me in front of everyone. Of course, he managed. Whatever the client requires. Victoria handed me her card. Not to Colton. To me. My direct line is on the back. Call me tomorrow, when the meeting was actually supposed to happen, and we'll discuss terms. As her team filed out, Victoria lingered by my shoulder. Her voice was low, meant only for me. I've been in this business 20 years. I know sabotage when I see it. I also know talent when I see it. She glanced at Colton, who was trying to intercept her CFO. Don't let them dim your light. She swept out of the conference room, her team falling in line behind her. The silence they left was deafening. Colton stood by the window, his reflection staring back at him. His trap had snapped shut all right. But somehow I wasn't the one caught in it. The conference room door clicked shut behind Victoria Morrison, and for a moment nobody moved. Colton stood frozen by the window, his reflection in the glass showing something I'd never seen before: genuine fear. Then, like a switch flipping, his face hardened back into its familiar mask of control. "My office. Now." He didn't wait for a response, just strode out, expecting us to follow like obedient dogs. Gregory finally moved from where he'd been hovering by the door. He touched my elbow just barely, then pulled his hand back as if I might burn him. "Come on, Sophie. Let's not make this worse." Worse? I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Maybe both. The executive elevator ride was suffocating. Colton faced forward, jaw clenched. Gregory studied his phone like it contained the secrets of the universe. I watched the floor numbers climb, each ding marking another second closer to whatever explosion was coming. Colton's office occupied the entire northwest corner of the building, floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk that cost more than most people's cars, and a sitting area designed to make visitors feel small. He positioned himself behind the desk immediately, reclaiming his throne. "Sit," he commanded. "I'll stand." Gregory made a small, pained sound. He took the chair furthest from his father, still refusing to look at me directly. "You went completely off script," Colton said, his voice low and dangerous. "That presentation wasn't what we approved. There was no we involved. I developed that presentation alone, for a meeting that was supposed to be tomorrow. Are you suggesting I deliberately sabotaged you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Before I could answer, Gregory spoke, but not to me. "Dad, are you saying she's lying about the meeting time?" The words hit harder than any slap. My own husband asking his father instead of me. Seeking Colton's version of the truth rather than mine. "I'm not suggesting anything," I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. "I'm stating facts. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow at 2. My laptop is in IT for updates that were mysteriously required this morning. The printed materials are at the copy center, scheduled for pickup tonight. Circumstances change in business," Colton said smoothly. "Successful executives adapt. And unsuccessful ones create circumstances designed to make others fail." Gregory's head snapped up. "Sophie, you can't just accuse." "What? Tell the truth." I turned on him then. "Where were you during that presentation, Gregory? Playing golf? Getting coffee? Anywhere but standing beside your wife while your father tried to destroy my career." I didn't know. You never know. That's the problem. You never want to know. Colton leaned back in his chair, watching us fight with something like satisfaction. "Regardless of your paranoid theories, Sophia, the fact remains that you've overstepped. Victoria Morrison may have been impressed by your little improvisation, but you work for Whitmore Analytics. Every client relationship, every innovation, every idea you develop here belongs to the company." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, "that's not entirely accurate." I pulled up the document I'd been saving for 3 years, the one Gregory had never bothered to read when I'd asked him to review it before signing. Section 7, subsection 3 of my employment agreement. Intellectual property developed outside of standard working hours using personal resources remains the property of the employee. Colton's expression didn't change, but I saw his fingers tighten on his desk. "You're suggesting that dashboard was personal work?" "I'm not suggesting. I'm stating. The predictive hesitation algorithm, the temporal pattern recognition system. I developed those on my own time, filed provisional patents under my maiden name. Sophia Chin, not Whitmore." I showed him my phone screen, the patent office confirmation emails dated over the past 2 years. Every innovation I showed Morrison today is legally mine. The silence was deafening. Gregory stared at me like he'd never seen me before. "You've been filing patents?" he asked. "Without telling me?" "I tried to tell you. Multiple times. But you were always too busy, too tired, or too focused on keeping your father happy to listen." Colton stood slowly, his movements controlled. You may own some algorithms, but you're still bound by your employment contract. And your marriage contract. The non-compete clause only applies if I'm terminated for cause or if I divorce Gregory and join a competitor. I know exactly what I signed. I met his stare directly. Just like I know about Chicago. About Morrison Pharmaceuticals. About how your division there collapsed after you lost their account. The color drained from Colton's face. Gregory looked between us, confused. What's she talking about, Dad? Nothing. Ancient history. But Colton's voice had lost its edge. Victoria Morrison remembers it differently. She remembers your rigid thinking and failure to adapt. Her words, not mine. The desk phone rang. Colton ignored it. It rang again. Then his cell phone started buzzing. Mr. Whitmore? Beth's voice came through the intercom. The board is calling an emergency meeting. They've heard about the Morrison presentation. Tell them I'll call back. Sir, they're already here. In the main conference room. Gregory stood. Dad, what's happening? But I knew. Victoria Morrison didn't just run a pharmaceutical company. She sat on 3 corporate boards. She played golf with our chairman. She just watched Colton try to sabotage his own employee. And she was the type of woman who didn't let that slide. We should go, Gregory said, reaching for my arm. I pulled away. You go. I have work to do. Sophie, please. We need to talk. We needed to talk 3 years ago. 2 years ago. 6 months ago. Every time your father humiliated me in meetings, stole credit for my work or scheduled family dinners that made it clear I'd never be family. Where were you then? He had no answer. He never did. I left them there and walked back to my office. The floor was buzzing with whispers. News traveled fast in glass buildings. Beth caught my eye as I passed, gave me a small thumbs up behind her desk where Colton couldn't see. My office felt different now. Smaller maybe. Or maybe I was just seeing it clearly for the first time. A pretty cage in a tower built by men who'd never wanted me there. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop, finally back from IT. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. My presentation, my research, my 8 weeks of work that had almost been my professional funeral. My phone buzzed. Gregory, coming home late. Dad needs me. Of course he did. Gregory always went where he was needed, and it was never to me. I worked until the office emptied, until the only sounds were the hum of computers and the distant noise of cleaning crews. At 9:30 I finally closed my laptop and gathered my things. The drive home was quiet. The house was dark when I arrived. Gregory still at the office, still choosing sides in a war he refused to acknowledge existed. I poured a glass of wine and sat in my home office, staring at the wall of certificates and awards. Summa cum laude from Northwestern. Analytics Excellence Award. Innovation in Data Science. All those achievements, and I was still just the woman who'd married into the Whitmore family. My phone rang at exactly 10 p.m. Unknown number. Sophia? This is Victoria Morrison. My wine glass stopped halfway to my lips. Mrs. Morrison. I wasn't expecting. I'll be direct. I want to offer you a position. Senior Vice President of Predictive Analytics at Morrison Pharmaceuticals. 800,000 base, plus equity, plus a signing bonus that should adequately compensate you for any complications from leaving your current position. The room spun slightly. That's incredibly generous, but you're worried about the non-compete. I've had my legal team review it. Client companies aren't considered competitors. You'd be free to join us immediately. You'd be free to join us immediately. Victoria's words echoed in my ear as I set the phone down. $800,000. Equity. Freedom from Colton's suffocating control. All I had to do was say yes. But first I needed to understand exactly what I was fighting. The next morning, Gregory was gone before dawn. Another emergency meeting with his father. I called in sick to work, something I'd never done in 3 years, and drove to the downtown public library. Using Whitmore Analytics computers for research would be like sending Colton a detailed report of my plans. The library's archived business journals went back decades. I started with Chicago 2018, Whitmore Analytics Midwest Division. The articles were buried deep, but they were there. Major pharmaceutical contract lost due to strategic disputes. Whitmore Midwest restructures after client exodus. And then the smoking gun. An interview with Victoria Morrison in Pharma Executive Quarterly. We require partners who can evolve with the industry, she'd said. Unfortunately, some firms remain stuck in outdated methodologies, unable to adapt to changing market dynamics. The article didn't name Colton directly, but the timeline was clear. Morrison Pharmaceuticals terminated their contract in March. By September, Whitmore Midwest had collapsed. I photographed every page with my personal phone. No trail, no evidence I'd been looking. My phone buzzed. A text from Beth. Can we meet? Urgent. Not at office. I found her at a coffee shop 6 blocks from Whitmore Analytics, hunched in a corner booth. She looked older than her 52 years, dark circles under her eyes, hands wrapped around her cup like it was a lifeline. I can't do this anymore, she said before I even sat down. What he makes me do, it's wrong. Beth, what are you talking about? She pulled out a small notebook, hands shaking. Your emails. He has me forward everything to a private server. Every contact you make, every meeting you schedule. She stopped, tears forming. What? He has me track your personal calendar. Your doctor's appointments. He wanted to know if you were trying to have children. My stomach turned. Why would he care about that? I don't know. He just said to report everything. When you had your annual exam last month, he asked specifically about birth control prescriptions. Beth's voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Sophia. My daughter, she has lupus. The treatments aren't covered by insurance. I need this job, the health benefits, but what I'm doing to you. I reached across the table, took her trembling hands. You're not doing anything to me. He is. There's more. She flipped through her notebook. Phone logs. He records your calls from the office line. And last week he had me pull your personnel file. Not just performance reviews. Everything. Background check, credit report, even your parents' information. My parents. They live in Ohio. They have nothing to do with. I know. But he wanted leverage. That's what he called it. Leverage. I photographed her notebook pages while she kept watch. 3 years of surveillance, documented in Beth's careful handwriting. Why are you telling me this now? Because what happened yesterday, that presentation, that was evil. And you still won. You turned his trap into triumph. She wiped her eyes. My daughter just turned 18. She'll age into her father's insurance next month. I can finally leave. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women bound by different chains to the same terrible man. Beth, would you be willing to document all of this officially? If needed. She nodded slowly. After next month. After my daughter is safe. I left the coffee shop with more evidence than I'd expected and a fury that burned cold in my chest. But the day's revelations weren't over. When I returned home, a silver Mercedes sat in our driveway. Margaret Whitmore emerged, elegant in cream cashmere and pearls, looking exactly like the society matron she'd become after divorcing Colton 15 years ago. We need to talk, she said, not waiting for an invitation before walking into my house. She settled into my living room like she owned it, which technically she probably did. The house was in Gregory's name, purchased with family money. I heard about yesterday's performance, she said. Impressive. Also foolish. Excuse me. You embarrassed Colton publicly. You showed strength. That's not something Whitmore men tolerate in their women. She studied her manicured nails. I should know. I made the same mistake 30 years ago. What are you talking about? Margaret's laugh was bitter. You think you're the first woman to marry into this family with ambition? I had my MBA from Wharton. I was running the emerging markets division when I met Colton. Young, brilliant, full of ideas. Her voice softened. Just like you. But you divorced him. You got out. After 20 years. After 2 children. After signing agreements that would make your head spin. She pulled a document from her purse. This might look familiar. It was a buyout agreement, dated 2008. Margaret had signed away all rights to her business ventures, innovations, and client relationships in exchange for a comfortable settlement and silence. He'll offer you something similar soon, she said. A generous package to disappear quietly. Take it. Why would I? Because the alternative is worse. She leaned forward. Whitmore men don't just defeat their enemies. They destroy them. Systematically. Completely. I watched Colton do it to 3 executives who challenged him. One ended up having a nervous breakdown. Another was blacklisted from the entire industry. And the third was me. She stood, smoothing her skirt. I fought for 2 years. Cost me my career, my reputation, most of my friends. In the end, I took the money and reinvented myself as a charity fundraiser. It's a nice life, but it's not the life I'd planned. You're telling me to give up. I'm telling you to survive. There are battles worth fighting and wars worth losing. Learn the difference. She left me with the old agreement and a warning. Check your prenup, dear. Really read it this time. That night, while Gregory attended another emergency meeting with his father, I spread our prenuptial agreement across my desk. I'd signed it 3 years ago, young and in love, trusting Gregory when he said it was just standard protection. Page by page, I read what I'd actually agreed to. Most of it was typical asset division, spousal support terms. But buried in Section 12, subsection F, was a clause that made my blood freeze. In the event of pregnancy or birth of children, all intellectual property developed during the marriage, regardless of previous provisions, becomes joint marital property subject to equal division upon dissolution. Equal division. Meaning if I had a child and then divorced Gregory, Colton could claim 50% of everything I'd created. My patents, my algorithms, my life's work. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through the past month's conversations. Colton's sudden interest in grandchildren. Gregory's increasing comments about starting a family. His mother's casual mentions of how nice it would be to have little ones around. It wasn't about legacy or love. It was about legal theft. My laptop dinged with an email. From Colton, sent to the entire executive team. Please join me in congratulating Gregory and Sophia as they prepare for the next chapter of their lives. We look forward to growing our Whitmore family. My phone immediately exploded with texts. Congratulations. When are you due? So exciting. I wasn't pregnant. Had never indicated I was. But Colton had just announced it to everyone who mattered, creating a narrative I'd have to publicly deny or privately accept. The front door opened. Gregory's footsteps, heavier than usual. Sophie. His voice carried a strange tone. We need to talk about starting our family. I stood there, holding the prenup with trembling hands as Gregory waited for my response about starting a family. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt like hours. Your father just announced to the entire executive team that I'm pregnant, I said, my voice eerily calm. Gregory's face went pale. He what? Check your email. He pulled out his phone and I watched his expression shift from confusion to horror. Sophie, I didn't know he was going to. Of course you didn't. You never know what he's going to do. That's your superpower, isn't it? Willful ignorance. That's not fair. Fair. I held up the prenup. Was hiding this clause about children fair? If I have a baby, I lose rights to my intellectual property. Your father could claim half of everything I've created. I didn't know about that clause. You signed it too, Gregory. Your name is right there. He sank into the armchair, suddenly looking much older than his 34 years. We need to correct this. Tell everyone it was a misunderstanding. No. I set down the document. First, I need to show you something. I pulled out my laptop and opened the files I'd been collecting. The Chicago articles. Beth's surveillance notes. His mother's old buyout agreement. For the next hour, I laid out the truth about his father. Not the successful businessman he pretended to be, but the systematic destroyer of careers and lives. Gregory's face grew paler with each revelation. When I showed him the evidence of offshore accounts Beth had found, accounts siphoning money from Whitmore Analytics, he finally spoke. This can't be real. It's all real. And there's more. Tomorrow I'm meeting with 3 people your father destroyed. Maybe after hearing their stories, you'll finally understand who you're defending. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes outside the city to a truck stop diner where no one from Whitmore Analytics would ever venture. They were already there when I arrived. 3 ghosts from Colton's past, gathered in a corner booth like survivors of the same war. Sarah Chin, no relation despite the shared surname, looked nothing like the brilliant analyst from her old company photos. Stress had aged her 10 years in 3. She developed the algorithm that became the foundation of Whitmore's predictive modeling system. He called it collaborative development, she said, stirring her coffee absently. Said we were a team. Then one day my keycard stopped working. Security escorted me out. The next week he announced his breakthrough innovation to the board. Marcus Thompson, former CFO, had kept meticulous records. I found discrepancies. $3 million routed through shell companies in Delaware. When I brought it to the board, Colton had already poisoned them against me. Said I was embezzling. The investigation cleared me, but the damage was done. No one would hire me. The third was Robert Jameson, Colton's former business partner from 20 years ago. We built the company together. 50-50 partnership. Then his lawyer found a technicality in our operating agreement. I lost everything overnight. My wife left me. My kids won't speak to me. All because I suggested we should modernize our approach. Why are you telling me this? I asked, though I already knew. Because you're the first person who might actually be able to stop him, Robert said. You have something we didn't: evidence, allies, and leverage. They spent the next 2 hours sharing documents they'd saved, connections they'd maintained, wounds that had never healed. Sarah had emails showing Colton's pattern of intellectual property theft. Marcus had financial records suggesting fraud. Robert had correspondence proving Colton had planned his betrayal for months. There's a board meeting next month, Robert said. Quarterly review. Colton's planning to restructure, eliminate several positions. Yours is probably on the list. How do you know? Because I still have friends there. Good people too scared to speak up. But if someone gave them a reason, a real chance at change. I left the diner with a flash drive full of evidence and a plan forming in my mind. But I needed more than historical grievances. I needed current proof and powerful allies. Victoria Morrison agreed to meet me for lunch at her private club downtown. She listened to everything, her expression never changing, fingers steepled under her chin. I suspected as much, she said when I finished. Colton's reputation precedes him, though few dare speak openly about it. Will you help? I already am. The contract we're signing specifically requires your involvement. If you leave Whitmore Analytics, the deal becomes void. That's $5 million in leverage. She signaled the waiter for more wine. But you need more than that. You need the board on your side. They're all his friends. No, they're businessmen. Show them Colton is bad for business and they'll turn on him faster than you can blink. She pulled out her phone. I sit on 3 boards with members of Whitmore's board. Let me make some calls. The quarterly meeting would be the perfect stage for your revelations. That evening I found Beth still at her desk long after everyone else had left. I need one more favor, I said. She looked up, fear flashing across her face. Sophia, I can't. Just listen. I'm not asking you to steal anything or risk your job. I just need you to do what Colton already asks. Document everything. But make copies. Real copies. Over the next 3 weeks, Beth became my silent partner in building an unassailable case. Every email Colton sent pressuring board members. Every document he altered before meetings. Every communication showing his manipulation and control. The hardest conversation came on a Thursday night, 3 days before the board meeting. I'd prepared dinner. Gregory's favorite, salmon with asparagus, the meal I'd cooked on our first anniversary when things were still good between us. We need to talk, I said as he sat down. About Dad's announcement? I've already told people it was a misunderstanding. About your father's crimes. And what you're going to do about them. I laid out everything. The evidence. The testimonies. The financial fraud. The lives destroyed. Gregory sat there, his salmon growing cold, his face cycling through denial, anger, bargaining, and finally a kind of hollow acceptance. You want me to betray my father. I want you to choose between being complicit in his crimes or being the man I thought I married. Sophie, it's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. I stood, pushing my untouched plate aside. The board meeting is in 3 days. Either you stand with me and tell the truth or you stand with him and become just another enabler. There's no middle ground anymore. Gregory sat at that table for 2 hours after I went to bed. At midnight I heard his car start. Through the window I watched him drive away, heading toward his father's house. I didn't know what he would choose. But I knew that regardless of his decision I was done being silent. Gregory didn't come home that night. Or the next. His absence filled our bedroom with a silence that felt like held breath. The morning of the board meeting I dressed in my sharpest suit, black with a burgundy silk blouse, the color of controlled fire. My hands were steady as I applied my lipstick. This was war and I was done pretending otherwise. I arrived at Whitmore Analytics at 6:30, 2 hours before the meeting. The building was nearly empty, just security guards and the overnight cleaning crew finishing their rounds. Perfect. The boardroom was on the top floor, a glass fortress where Colton held court. I'd never been inside during an actual board meeting. Spouses weren't invited to those sacred gatherings. But today I wasn't coming as a spouse. Each board member's place was already set with their nameplate, water glass, and meeting agenda. I pulled out 9 USB drives from my bag, each one containing the same explosive content. Colton's offshore accounts, the testimonials from 15 former employees he'd destroyed, the Morrison contract with its non-negotiable clause requiring my involvement, and Beth's meticulous documentation of his corporate abuse. I placed each drive precisely beside each notepad, then picked up Colton's agenda. He'd buried my performance review and recommended termination as item 7, probably hoping the board would be tired and compliant by then. Too bad they'd have plenty to discuss before we got that far. You're here early. I spun around. Gregory stood in the doorway looking haggard. He hadn't shaved and his suit was the same one he'd worn 3 days ago. Where have you been? Thinking. Reviewing files. Making choices. He entered the room slowly like he was walking through quicksand. I know what you're planning. Are you here to stop me? I'm here to help you. The words hung between us. I searched his face for deception, for the weakness I'd grown accustomed to, but found something else. Resolve maybe. Or just exhaustion with living a lie. I've been at the office, he continued, pulling a folder from his briefcase. Going through financial records I should have examined years ago. Dad's been stealing from the company. From our shareholders. From everyone. He handed me the folder. Inside were bank statements, wire transfers, a clear trail of embezzlement spanning 5 years. All bearing Colton's signature. All hidden in accounts Gregory was supposed to oversee as CFO. You knew. I suspected. But suspecting and proving are different things. And proving requires courage I didn't have until now. He met my eyes. I'm sorry it took me so long. By 8:30, board members began arriving. Through the glass walls, I watched them find the USB drives, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern as they plugged them into their laptops. Richard Hamilton, the chairman, looked particularly grim as he scrolled through the evidence. Colton arrived at 8:45, striding in with his usual confidence. He didn't notice the USB drives. His assistant usually set up his technology. He was too busy reviewing his notes for my professional execution. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Hamilton began once everyone was seated. Before we address the official agenda, we need to discuss some concerning materials that have come to our attention. Colton's head snapped up. What materials? These. Richard held up the USB drive. Sophia, I believe you distributed these? I did. Colton's face darkened. My daughter-in-law has no standing in this meeting. She should be removed immediately. Actually, Gregory said, his voice carrying across the room, she's here as a key employee whose termination you've proposed. She has every right to defend herself. The father and son locked eyes across the table. The resemblance between them had never been more striking or more tragic. Additionally, Gregory continued, standing now, as CFO, I need to present some urgent financial discrepancies I've discovered. This is highly irregular, Colton started. So is embezzlement, Gregory said quietly. The room erupted. Board members shouted questions, demanded explanations. Colton's carefully controlled meeting devolved into chaos. Richard Hamilton pounded his gavel for order. Mr. Whitmore, Colton, these are serious allegations. The evidence on these drives suggests systematic fraud. Those documents are taken out of context, Colton said, but his voice had lost its commanding tone. This is clearly a coordinated attack by a disgruntled employee and my own son, who's being manipulated by his wife. Manipulated. I stood, my voice cutting through the noise. Like Sarah Chin was manipulated when you stole her algorithm? Like Marcus Thompson when you framed him for embezzlement? Or Robert Jameson when you destroyed your partnership? Each name landed like a physical blow. Colton's face went from red to white. The conference phone in the center of the table suddenly lit up. Richard answered it. Mr. Hamilton? This is Victoria Morrison. I understand you're discussing Sophia Whitmore's position with the company. Victoria's voice filled the room through the speakers. She timed this perfectly. Mrs. Morrison, we're in a board meeting. I'll be brief. Morrison Pharmaceuticals' $5 million contract explicitly requires Mrs. Whitmore's leadership. If she's terminated, our contract becomes void immediately. I should also mention I've been in communication with several of your other major clients. As if on cue, Richard's assistant rushed in with a tablet. Sir, urgent messages from Henderson Industries, the Zhao Group, Brennan Enterprises and 3 others. They're all saying the same thing. Richard read from the tablet, his face growing paler with each word. If Sophia Whitmore is removed from their accounts, they'll terminate their contracts immediately. This is extortion. Colton slammed his hand on the table. No, a familiar voice said from the doorway. This is justice. Margaret Whitmore entered, flanked by 2 lawyers. She looked magnificent, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing the kind of quiet power that comes from old money and older secrets. Hello, Colton. Board members. She nodded graciously. I believe there's some confusion about company ownership. Margaret, you have no standing here. Actually, I do. She handed Richard a thick document. During our divorce, I retained 40% of founding shares in Whitmore Analytics. Colton assured me they were symbolic non-voting shares. My lawyers have recently discovered otherwise. Richard's eyes widened as he read. These are voting shares. Full voting rights. Which means, Margaret continued, I'm the largest individual shareholder in this company. She looked directly at Colton. You've held this company hostage for 20 years. Hidden profits, destroyed careers, built your empire on the backs of people you've crushed. It ends today. You can't do this, Colton said, but his voice was hollow. I built this company. We built this company, Margaret corrected. Before you decided I was too ambitious for a Whitmore wife. Before you made me choose between my career and my children. Before you broke me into pieces and bought my silence. She turned to me then, and for the first time since I'd known her, she smiled, really smiled. But some chains need breaking, don't they, Sophia? The board voted within the hour. It wasn't close. The vote was unanimous. 12 hands raised against the man who'd built this empire, who'd ruled it with an iron fist for 2 decades. Richard Hamilton's voice was steady as he read the resolution. Effective immediately, Colton Whitmore is removed from his position as Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Analytics. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Colton stood there, his usual commanding presence crumbling like a sand castle against the tide. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked his age, 63 years carved into deep lines around his eyes, silver hair no longer distinguished but just gray. Furthermore, Richard continued, the board appoints Sophia Whitmore as interim Chief Analytics Officer, with full authority over the Morrison project and our other pharmaceutical accounts. Security had been called. Standard procedure, Richard assured everyone, though we all knew it was more than that. 2 guards stood by the door waiting. Colton gathered his leather portfolio with mechanical precision, his movements slow and deliberate. As he passed my chair, he stopped. Our eyes met, his gray gaze no longer cold but something else entirely. Confusion? Respect? Or just the bewildered recognition of seeing himself reflected in someone he'd tried to destroy? Well played, he said quietly so only I could hear. Then louder, addressing the room with a ghost of his old authority. I built this company from nothing. Remember that when it all falls apart. The guards escorted him out, their footsteps fading down the hallway. Through the glass walls, I watched employees stand from their desks, witnessing the impossible, Colton Whitmore being removed from his own kingdom. Margaret broke the silence. That went better than expected. He didn't even invoke the Founder's Clause. Would it have mattered? Richard asked. No. But it would have been Messier. He turned to me. The office is yours now. Everything in it. The meeting continued for another hour. Transition protocols, client notifications, legal procedures, but I barely heard any of it. I'd won. After 3 years of subtle abuse, public humiliation and systematic undermining, I'd won. So why did I feel so empty? Gregory found me in the bathroom afterward, splashing cold water on my face. You did it, he said to my reflection in the mirror. We did it. Your testimony about the financial records. Stop. He held up his hand. Don't give me credit I don't deserve. I should have done that 2 years ago. 1 year ago. Any time before today. I turned to face him. Really looked at him for the first time in months. The golden boy was tarnished. Dark circles, trembling hands, the weight of his choices etched into premature lines around his mouth. I need to show you something, he said, pulling out his phone. He opened a note-taking app, scrolled through pages and pages of entries. I've been seeing Dr. Patterson for 6 months. Therapy. Dad didn't know. Each entry was dated, documenting his internal struggle. October 15th. S presented brilliant analysis at meeting. Dad credited it to team effort. Should have spoken up. Didn't. Coward. November 2nd. Dad changed S's presentation without telling her. Watched her scramble. Said nothing. Self-hatred growing. December 8th. S cried in the car after Dad's holiday party. Wanted to comfort her. Couldn't find words. What kind of husband am I? Gregory. There's more. So much more. Every time I failed you I wrote it down. Like somehow documenting my cowardice would make it better. His voice cracked. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm asking for to become someone worth forgiving. The bathroom door opened. Beth poked her head in. Sophia? They need you in. Oh, I'm sorry. It's okay, Beth. I'll be right there. She nodded and left. Gregory stepped back, creating space between us. We'll talk tonight, I said. At home. Home, he repeated like he was testing whether the words still applied. The rest of the day was a blur of meetings, phone calls, and transitions. By 5 o'clock I stood alone in what had been Colton's office. The space felt too large, too cold with its modern furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His presence still lingered, cologne, leather, and something harder to define. Power maybe. Or just fear. I was studying the view when I heard footsteps in the parking garage through the open window. 7 floors down, but the acoustics carried. I looked out and saw him, Colton, standing by my car. I took the elevator down, my heels clicking against the concrete as I approached him. He looked smaller here, without his office fortress, without his army of employees. Waiting to slash my tires? I asked. He almost smiled. Too crude. Not my style. Then what? He leaned against my car, suddenly looking exhausted. You remind me of someone. Who? Myself. 35 years ago. He stared at the concrete wall like it held memories. My father-in-law owned a consulting firm. Brought me in after I married Patricia. His daughter, Margaret's older sister. Did you know that? I shook my head. He made my life miserable. Every idea dismissed, every success credited to family connections. Sound familiar? He laughed bitterly. I fought back. Took over his company. Destroyed him completely. Patricia never forgave me. Divorced me a year later. I married Margaret on the rebound, thought I could do better the second time. Instead you became him. Worse. I became what I thought he was. Turned out he was just a scared old man trying to hold on to what he'd built. He straightened, adjusted his tie out of habit. You won today, Sophia. But winning and living with winning, those are different things. Rain started falling, light at first, then heavier. Colton had no umbrella, no coat, things that were always handled by assistants who no longer worked for him. I could have been better, he said quietly. To Margaret. To Gregory. But being better requires admitting you were wrong, and I've spent so long being right that I forgot how. He walked away into the rain, his expensive suit darkening with water, his shoulders bent against more than just weather. I stood there watching until his figure disappeared around the corner. When I got home, Gregory was in the living room with Chinese takeout, from the place we'd ordered from on our first date back when everything seemed possible. I thought you might be too tired to cook, he said. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, eating in silence for a while. Then he pulled out a leather journal. This is everything, he said, placing it between us. Every time I failed you. Every time I chose comfort over courage. Every time I let him hurt you because I was too scared to stop him. Why document it? Because Dr. Patterson said I needed to see the pattern. To understand that each small betrayal was a choice. He set down his chopsticks. I chose wrong, Sophie. Every single time. And now I'm choosing differently. I stood up in that boardroom. I provided evidence against my own father. It's not enough, I know that. But it's a start. We can't just reset Gregory. Too much has happened. I know. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking if maybe we could try something different. Not husband and wife, not right away. Maybe just two people figuring out if there's anything left worth saving. That night he slept in the guest room, his choice, not mine. I heard him on the phone with Dr. Patterson scheduling extra sessions. Through the door I heard him crying, deep, ugly sobs of a man finally facing himself. The next morning I signed the Morrison contract in what had been Colton's office. $5 million over 3 years with performance bonuses that could double it. Congratulations, Victoria said, shaking my hand. You've earned this. But as I looked at Colton's nameplate still sitting on the desk, Margaret's warning echoed, Whitmore men break women slowly. I feel like I've become him, I admitted to Victoria. I destroyed him the same way he tried to destroy me. Victoria studied me carefully. Did you lie? Steal? Fabricate evidence? No. Then you didn't become him. You survived him. There's a difference. She moved to the window looking out at the city. Surviving isn't becoming, Sophia. It's transcending. Remember that. Victoria's words stayed with me as she left that day. Surviving isn't becoming. It's transcending. 6 months had passed since that boardroom confrontation, and I was finally beginning to understand what she meant. The morning sun streamed through the office windows. My office now, though I'd replaced Colton's cold modern furniture with warmer pieces that actually invited people to sit and talk. The earnings report on my desk showed a 30% revenue increase. The Morrison contract had attracted other pharmaceutical giants. Whitmore Analytics was thriving, but more importantly, it was healing. Your 9 o'clock is here, Beth announced from the doorway, no longer the anxious woman who'd once spied for Colton. As chief of staff, she'd blossomed into someone I barely recognized, confident, decisive, protective of the culture we were building together. Send them in. Sarah Chin entered, the analyst whose algorithm Colton had stolen 3 years ago. She'd been my first rehire, brought back with a formal apology and the title of Senior Innovation Director she'd always deserved. The predictive model is exceeding projections, she said, setting down her tablet. Morrison's competitors are inquiring about licensing. What do you think? She smiled, something she rarely did before. I think we're just getting started. After she left, I stood by the window watching the city below. Somewhere down there, Colton worked in a small consulting firm, his empire reduced to a single office and 2 employees. I'd heard he was doing pro bono work for startups, perhaps trying to balance some cosmic scale. Gregory said his father seemed smaller but somehow more at peace. They met for coffee once a month now, slowly rebuilding something that might eventually resemble a relationship. Gregory and I had our own reconstruction project. We'd separated 4 months ago. Not a divorce, but a recognition that we needed to learn who we were individually before we could know who we might be together. He'd moved into a downtown apartment, started intensive therapy 3 times a week, and began working with a different division of the company where he could build his own reputation. Twice a week we had dinner. Not as husband and wife, but as 2 people carefully exploring whether there was something worth salvaging in the wreckage of our marriage. Last Tuesday he'd actually made me laugh. Really laugh, for the first time in 2 years. My phone buzzed. Emma, final fitting in an hour. Don't be late. My sister's wedding was this weekend. A simple outdoor ceremony, nothing like the Whitmore social production mine had been. I arrived at the bridal shop to find her spinning in front of mirrors, radiant in ivory silk. You look perfect, I said, meaning it. You look happy, she countered. Really happy. Not that fake smile you wore for 3 years. I'm getting there. She adjusted her veil, studying me in the mirror. Is Gregory coming to the wedding? He's invited. Whether he comes is up to him. And you're okay with that? I'm learning to be okay with uncertainty. The wedding day arrived with perfect September weather. I stood beside Emma as her maid of honor, holding her bouquet while she exchanged vows with David, a teacher like her who looked at my sister like she hung the moon. During the reception, my father pulled me aside for our father-daughter dance. I owe you an apology, he said as we swayed to the music. For what? For pushing you toward Gregory. For saying he was good enough for you. I was blinded by the Whitmore name, the success, the image. He spun me gently. You were always good enough on your own, Sophie. I should have seen that. We all got blinded by the shine, I said. The important thing is we can see clearly now. Halfway through the reception, Gregory arrived. Alone. He'd had a major client meeting in Boston but had flown back specifically for this. His rental car was still running in the parking lot when he walked in, slightly out of breath, carrying a gift I knew he'd picked out himself because the wrapping was terrible. You made it, Emma said, genuinely surprised. I promised I would. He looked at me. I'm trying to keep promises these days. When the band played a slow song, he approached tentatively. Would you like to dance? I hesitated, then took his offered hand. We moved awkwardly at first, both trying to remember how we used to fit together. Then he said, remember our first dance? At that terrible club in Wicker Park. You stepped on my feet 3 times. But you kept dancing with me anyway. I thought you had potential. Do you still? I looked up at him, really looked. He'd lost weight, but in a healthy way. The therapy was working. I could see it in how he held himself, no longer constantly checking over his shoulder for his father's approval. I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm willing to find out. Monday morning I called an all-staff meeting. The conference room was packed, energy buzzing through the space. I announced Beth's daughter had been accepted into a clinical trial for an experimental lupus treatment, fully funded by the company's new employee assistance program. The applause was thunderous. Marcus Thompson was there too, hired back as CFO after his reputation was restored. Robert Jameson consulted for us now, his expertise invaluable. Even some of Colton's enablers had transformed, freed from the culture of fear he'd cultivated. We're not just rebuilding, I told them. We're reimagining what a company can be. That evening I stood in my office as the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. 2 contracts lay on my desk, both life-changing, both terrifying in different ways. The first was from Victoria Morrison, a permanent position as Executive Vice President at Morrison Pharmaceuticals. Double my current salary, mentorship from one of the industry's pioneers, a chance to build something entirely my own. The second was an acquisition offer. With Margaret's backing and several investors, I could buy majority control of Whitmore Analytics, truly transform it from the ground up. Make it mine in every way that mattered. My phone chimed. Gregory, I'm at the grocery store. Thought I'd cook dinner tonight. Your place or mine? Or should we try something neutral? There's that new place on Michigan Avenue. Or we could just talk. About the future. Whatever that means for us. His uncertainty made me smile. The old Gregory would have made the decision for both of us. This version was learning to ask, to wait, to let me choose too. I looked at the contracts again, then at the city spreading endlessly beyond my window. 6 months ago I'd thought revenge would be the ending, the final chapter where justice was served and the villain fell. But standing here now, I realized it had never been about endings. It was about beginnings. About choosing who to become when the chains finally break. About learning that transcending isn't about forgetting the past but about refusing to let it define your future. I picked up my phone to text Gregory back, then stopped. Some decisions deserved more than words on a screen. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, leaving both contracts unsigned on the desk. Tomorrow I would choose. Tonight I just wanted to have dinner with someone I was still getting to know, and talk about futures that were finally ours to write. If this story of corporate revenge and redemption kept you hooked until the very end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Victoria Morrison turned Colton's own trap into Sophia's launching pad. That conference room reversal was pure brilliance. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories of underdogs fighting back. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.